been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. walking long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. walking long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power.
Hey folks, welcome to today's session where we're going to be stepping through a creation of an outdoor environment. Now this is a second session, so this is going to be covering similar content to what was covered in last week's exterior environment session. However, due to the questions and information and such that came through from last week's session, hopefully I can kind of answer some other things, go into them a bit more in depth. Hopefully any attendees that have come in have a better idea of questions they may want to ask, concerns they may want to bring up, anything like that. Now, I've started once again going into the topic before I do proper introductions. But my name is Chris Murphy. I handle evangelism for Unreal Engine in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. My role pre-pandemic was to support developers by heading around to different studios and countries and working with folks all across the world for different Unreal Engine projects. During this current situation, my role has shifted to more of a webinar-focused kind of situation, along with calls to other developers. Now, on the line with me as well, we have Tony Reed, who is the territory manager for this region. It's also this project was his brainchild, so for the short film challenge. So for any and all questions concerning like overview of how this short film challenge goes down and anything you may want to know, Tony's the man to chat to. As well as that, we have Alex Stevens on the line, who is another evangelist. However, unlike myself, who has a technical art background, Alex has an engineering background. So if you have any in-depth programming questions, he's the person to chat to as well. Now, for today's session, we're going to be covering how to build a landscape. We're going to be covering sky atmosphere, distance fields, and using the foliage tools to kind of create large-scale outdoor environments. So if you have only joined for yesterday's session, you've probably seen a whole lot of light baking and things like that. The good news is we don't touch that at all for this project. So yeah, this should be a lot more streamlined. The thing is, though, is that when it comes to creating outdoor environments, my advice here is to actually take a look at your settings before going into it, and I'll show you why. So when it comes to developing an outdoor environment, there's a few things that I strongly recommend you change. Now, the first is you'll notice that when you see my screen, we already have an error message on screen. Errors are usually bad, but in this case, it means I'm doing something right. And that is that this error message is saying the project doesn't support an atmospheric fog. And the reason it's telling me this is I've already gone into my project settings and I've gone down to rendering and I've turned off a few things. And the reason I've turned off these things is I know I won't need them. And by turning them off, because I know I won't need them, I can overall improve performance within the engine, I can free up resources, and most importantly for you is I can actually reduce material compilation times. By reducing material compilation times, we can go ahead and have faster iteration for any environmental changes that we're really making. So I'll run you through some of the settings that I've nuked. Okay, and these are the important ones. For this kind of environment, it's often a good idea to work this way. Now, the first of these is I've turned off static lighting. So I've said I don't want to be baking any lighting whatsoever. I want to run this entire world fully dynamic. Now, If we scroll down, I've also enabled generate mesh distance fields. This is what we're going to use for some of our environmental shadowing. It's a nice technique that is both cheap with reasonable quality results. So hopefully that kind of covers it. So if we scroll beyond this, for other settings that have been checked, I've also gone through and you'll see this thing here that says opaque and early Z pass, and I've set this to opaque and masked, and that actually exposes another variable that I can change called mask materials only in early Z pass. Now I know that kind of sounds like some gibberish, but essentially what this does is this means when you're rendering foliage, it spends a bit more time going through the environment to work out which pixels it actually wants to draw, and it kind of culls the rest of them. Now what this means is I've seen this give 20, 30 FPS boosts for folks that are working on large, dense foliage scenes. So if you're doing something that's like an interior architectural visualization kind of a scene, these settings will actually, they won't really help your performance. In fact, they could potentially be a little worse for it. However, if you are going to be doing something that is featuring the outdoors, this can be a really, really big immediate win. And it's really just one setting here and a checkbox. So keep those two in mind. The other things that I've gone down to is quite simple, is I've gone to these shader permutation reduction settings, and I've just turned off things that I know I'm not going to be using. I'm not going to be using a stationary skylight. It's going to be a mobile one. I know I'm not going to be using atmospheric fog. I'm going to use the new sky atmosphere system, which may sound different. May sound the same, but it's actually quite different. So sky atmosphere is the new system, whereas atmosphere fog is the old system. Okay, so I've turned that off as well, which was giving me the error on that main screen. Apart from that, I think everything else is pretty much vanilla. So it was just those settings that we've kind of covered through. But I wanted folks to just be aware of how some of those things were set up. So the next thing for me to do is to go ahead and actually create an environment. I'm going to create something that is going to be from a reasonably blank slate. So I'm actually going to go new level. And we're going to create something that doesn't involve anything that's on screen right now. And it's going to be an empty level. Okay. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to leverage a system that is built into Unreal called landscapes. So whenever you're building a large outdoor environment, you generally want to work in your landscape system. Now to do this, you click Modes, and you can say Landscape. Someone's asked, did I mean that the early ZPass setting is only recommended for exterior environments? I would strongly recommend it if your project involves an exterior environment. So I've got a landscape system here. I've just hit enabled it, and it's immediately giving me kind of a bit of an overlay in terms of how this should be set up. Okay, so we can see that what this would look like if I just clicked create. This would be the environment that we're going with. Now there are some optimization considerations that you may want to generally consider. This is really going to come down to the kind of environment that you're working on, but essentially it's broken up whereby these brighter lines represent the components, and these darker lines represent the quads. Now how this works, just as a quick heads up, is if we look at this square here, if I can see any of that square, it's processing it under the hood, and it's saying, build that entire square. The second I can't see any of the square, then everything else is no longer being processed, and it saves your resources. This means that there are certain kinds of projects where it's better to have big squares, right? Because if you're going to see them all anyway, you might as well just have big ones and have fewer things that need to be rendered. However, if you're going to have like a whole lot of culling going on, you may want to consider small ones. Now, if for the most part for film and TV projects, it's likely that this won't matter too much. So I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to go into it too much today. But I did want to just flag it for any, for lack of a better term, like advanced users that we're going to be feeling like they may need to consider these kinds of settings. Now, the one thing I will turn on just before I click create is I'm going to enable this option here that says enable edit layers. This means that we can leverage the new system that's just come into Unreal Engine that allows for landscape layers. So I'm going to turn that on and I'm going to click create. Now, when I clicked create, we see that we immediately have an environment in front of us. And the cool thing is I'm already in sculpt mode. And if I use my square brackets, I can actually just paint straight into this environment. So you can see here that we're painting mountains and such straight into this environment. One of the cool things that's going on here as well is if we look at what that's doing under the hood, so I hit F2 to go into wireframe mode, sorry, Alt 2 to go into wireframe mode. Here's how a landscape actually works. Watch what happens as I move closer to the landscape. Now, if you saw that, you'll notice that what's actually happening is as I go close to an environment and as I move away from the environment, landscapes are actually smart enough to kind of add tessellation and add detail as I get closer to them. But as I move away, they kind of spread apart and reduce the overall cost of that landscape. It may be a little tricky to see on the stream, but hopefully that's coming through. But that's really one of the cool things we're leveraging here. That said, painting landscapes like this would not be ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some lights and some fog into the scene for me to just immediately have a basic setup that I can work with. I'm going to save the map as well and just call this demo map. So we've saved it. We've got a demo map up and running. And I'm just going to drag in a few things. Now, the first thing that I'm going to want is a directional light. And you can see here that once we added that directional light, we have some shadows that are like there. So this makes it a bit easier because if I was to start painting into the world, I can have a much better idea of what the general form looks like in this situation. So that's useful. Now, the other thing that I personally like to do whenever I add a directional light, it's a good idea to rename it to sun or something like that so that you're a bit more aware that this specific directional light represents a giant wave of light coming in and more importantly represents the sun. I also like having some sort of background that is not just pure vast emptiness of space, so I'm going to go ahead and add a sky atmosphere too. And you may remember that we used this in yesterday's interior environment session. Now when you drag that in, nothing will change immediately. It will only change when it knows about the sun existing. And unfortunately, just naming something the sun does not make it so. So instead, I actually have to go to my directional light, and under its settings, I actually need to look for a setting called atmosphere/fog sunlight. And the second I turn this on, we're now going to physically accurately represent the sun. And as I move the directional light, we can see that it is actually going ahead and it's working this out for me a bit better. Okay. So this is giving us a slightly nicer environment setup. Everything is good. The other thing that I would like to do here is just quickly show off a cool little feature, which is if you go to your sky atmosphere, and if I was to increase my camera speed from 4 to super fast, watch what happens when I zoom out. So the sky atmosphere system actually goes ahead and it physically accurately renders the atmosphere from different altitudes. So if I pull all the way back into the vastness of space, it will still correctly show me what things should look like from that height. I kind of love that. So I'm going to come down to here and I'm going to correct my speeds because that was very quick. Great. So I've got this the sky atmosphere in place. The other things that are worth considering for this situation are to have I'm going to have a general height fog, so exponential height fog. I personally like to, when using height fogs, set them to volumetric. And I'm also going to just generally lower the density, but just that little bit of like distance fog as something moves away from me just creates a nicer environment, I find. So we've got that set up. This is all generally working. The only thing for us to really go to now is to kind of start crafting out this environment. So just before I go into this, I really do want to stress that, for any folks that are in on this session, please, please, please feel free to ask or comment or anything on the YouTube chat. It's really going to help me understanding in what's helping you and what information you'd like to know more about, and just the reason we're running these sessions live instead of just giving everyone pre-recorded videos is because we really wanted to be able to have that dialogue and really work with everyone. So someone said, so am I right in thinking that if you dropped in anything but the directional light, you'd be looking at those crazy build times? So this entire environment is going to be set up for us to completely ignore build times across the board. By disabling static lighting, I'm turning that off. I can still drop in my lights here, and we're not going to get as much GI straight out of the box as you would, so it's not going to be 100% perfect, but generally we find that these environments still work pretty well. So don't stress about that. My general advice for this situation is go down this pathway, light it dynamically. It should be good, it should be quick, it shouldn't be resource intensive, which is nice. And then consider approaching something along the lines of ray tracing for your final outputs as a potential option. So this is all put in. The last type of light that I would like to add to the scene is a skylight. And a skylight goes ahead and actually we can see what it's doing here. So see how this shadow here is very dark? When I drop in a skylight, what a skylight does is it basically takes a 360 image of the environment, so it kind of captures the general ambient light, and it allows you to project that back in. So this is just kind of a nice way of just softening up your shadows and having things a bit better. Now it's worth noting that the second you set your skylight to movable, it's going to enable something called distance field ambient occlusion, which is going to be a core part of what we're doing later on. Okay. So I've dropped this in. We're generally set up. The only other thing I may want to do is set my sun to also be movable. So we're definitively not baking anything. Someone's asked, can we change those settings you used at the start with a green grid? So you can kind of change them. If you want to change them, you need to create a new landscape and copy the layers across. Landscapes allow you to export their height data, so you can just kind of export the height map and then re-import it. But I don't think you can change the tessellation and section sizes on the fly. Alex, feel free to verify that for me in background while the session is going. So we've got this generally set up now. The next thing that I would like to do is to start working out the best ways to approach my environment. And there's a few different ways that we could do this. Now, it's worth noting that the general approach, and the one that we've had historically, has always been, paint in some mountains, and then let's go through and maybe we want to add some erosion to this. So, we start sculpting away, we start getting this environment looking okay, and, you may want to, get something roughed out this way and set up, and it looks okay. You can get this really nice form, it kind of pinches things in. You may want to run a hydro erosion instead, which will give you different results, so it kind of more accurately starts to handle what would happen with the soil in certain locations. And there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. However, it is worth noting that as of reasonably recently, we've added a new system in place that folks may want to consider as their general approach, and that new system is called landmass. So how landmass works is this. If I was to go ahead to my plugins menu, do a search for landmass, you can see that I've already turned this on. Okay. Now landmass allows me to do something pretty cool, which is it allows me to control the sculpt environment based off of blueprints. And landmass is a collection of those blueprints that kind of run everything under the hood. So I want you to look at what this looks like. If I was here and I was to select blueprints, I can now select a kind of blueprint. And actually, before I go any further, I'm going to create a new layer, much like you would in Photoshop or GIMP or whatever tool you would like to use. And I'm going to call this mountains. Okay. I'm also going to hide the existing layer so it doesn't get in my way. So, I've created mountains, I've clicked blueprint, and I'm going to tell it that I want to create a landmass brush. Okay. Now, when I do this and I click, we're now given this. And what's cool about this is that when you alt drag off of these points, you can kind of start to actually kind of create your environment in whatever way you need. And this is really, really, really useful, because if we look at what we have right here, you know, maybe I want to create something that's generally kind of carving away at the landscape, right? So let's go with something reasonably large. But let's look at some of the settings. So, okay, I've created a landscape that looks like this, but we don't really want to have a giant triangular landscape. I understand. So what can we do? Well, the first off is under fall off, enable cap shape. And cap shape may have looked like it disabled everything, but what it actually does is this. When you select the blueprint brush, you've now kind of created more of a plateau. So see, I'm now able to kind of just pull this downwards to create an environment that may be a bit better for what I want. So I could start with things like capping the shape, but I can also run some really cool little algorithms on this thing. So watch this. If I have an environment like this, and I go down to curl noise. Curl noise gets these rampy bits, and it basically runs extra information into them that adds a little bit of distortion, so that you don't get these perfectly straight lines. So watch what happens if I turn this curl noise up, and I'm going to increase the micro curl noise as well. And you can change the tiling amounts to really kind of fix the result for what it is you need. So doing so, you know, again, it kind of gives us a much nicer situation to really handle it. And if I pull this upwards, you can see that that's now kind of starting to carve out those curls a little bit nicer. So, yeah, we're going to pull this down to here for the minute. And, you know, let's look at some other settings. Now, another one that's really useful is displacement. So displacement gets whatever texture you plug in here and basically runs that as a height channel over the top of things. So if I was to tell it that I wanted a displacement of 400, see how our environment inside of this space is kind of looking a little bit lumpier, a little bit noisier? This is really, really useful for what we're doing, because I can kind of get this and I can say, yes, bring on the lumpy areas. Now, if I get this, the other thing that's worth noting is that I can easily kind of mix and match these. So if I wanted to get this here and then alt drag this over to here, you know, I can clone that. I can do whatever I need to. Again, I do want to stress that this system is reasonably new, so you know it's just going to improve over time. But hopefully, this kind of gives folks a bit of an idea about how things go. So see how by doing this, we can kind of get a little bit of that segmenting going on. Someone said they'd like to do an island in the middle of the ocean. If you want to do something like that, I mean, I could get these and just pull them up. There's a really cool setting under the hood that isn't always entirely stable. I will be upfront about that. It's not always entirely stable, but if you want, I can show you it. So if you actually get any of these, in fact, you know, I wasn't going to do this, but let's see if you see what folks think. So if I wanted to create something like an island, one of the really cool features that you actually can use is you can control the curve fall off of how this is determined. So I'm going to disable cap shape for just a second, at which point we now have this weird mountain in the middle of our hole. But if I go down to a section, and I got to warn you that, again, this is experimental, so some of these tools can be a little bit unstable. But if we get something like this and we go down to curves, there's actually the ability to use an elevation curve. And this is really cool for making islands, because if I get this asset and I say I want to use a island curve, which is one that someone set up earlier, this actually allows you to structure this. This allows you to structure what an island curve would look like. So I'm gonna create a new one. Just gonna copy it, and I'm gonna give this a name that is, I don't know, demo curve. And if I have this demo curve open, we can actually feed this information back into our shapes. So if I was to control this curve, let's say that on our structure we wanted to I wanted to add a key. And add another key. So I wanted to kind of get this lip going on. And I hit save. And I tell it to use a demo curve. You can now see that it's kind of getting that weirdo lip that I just created as the fall off kind of comes in. So if I wanted to, you know, I can get these things and set it up as I see fit. So I could say, hey, bring in a slight bump, and then bring things down, and then overall, let's just bring it to here. And we kind of get some really weird results with that. But you can, as I said, kind of more comfortably start to handle how elevation would look for your island and drive it from little curves along the way, which I personally think is really valuable. So we can do something like that. Cap accounts for it, so it won't go up, it'll just do that lip. So we can actually kind of adjust how the shorelines essentially work. And I could have this and say, hey, towards the center, I want you to pull in. Which allows you to kind of create more interesting structures for how these things set up. And again, this entire like setup here is done in Blueprint. So if you were really ambitious, you actually could make your own landmass formations and say how they're driven, which you know, the developer in me is super excited by. Cool. So we've just kind of created something a bit strange, but that's okay. And I'm going to, you know, someone asked about doing an ocean, so I might as well. It's worth noting that in the next version of Unreal, we have native ocean support. So this entire environment is going to be much easier for us to generally work around, because you're literally going to be able to paint in the ocean with a spline and say, here's where it is, and the engine will just work out the rest. You can then paint in rivers, and they'll automatically connect through to the ocean and have like a nice, what's the word that I'm after? Have like a nice blend between the river and the ocean. Same thing with lakes and such. So it's getting, honestly, it's getting a bit ridiculous, but I love it at the same time. Pretty keen on that in the next thing, because the next build not only has water but has nice advanced cloud systems that let you just drop clouds in. And there's a video of that online if you feel like checking in the Unreal Fest online talk. All right, so we've created this general environment. You can see here that those curves created that kind of ditch that I was telling you about. So we were able to kind of structure how this all looked accordingly. What I would like to do is I would like to move on to the next thing, which is let's actually get this landscape looking nice, because right now it's a little ugly. One thing that I should point out here is that if you want to go into it, you can actually tell landmass to also paint the layers that are beneath it. So I could actually have this painting dirt straight onto these or painting grass straight onto it. I'm not going to do it for today's session because it requires a slightly more advanced setup, but you can actually have that in there. Someone's asked, when's 426 due? 426 is due towards the end of the year, but I'm not sure if there's a firm date that we can put onto it just yet. That said, you can access some of 426's features early if you feel like living dangerously, because at any point you can access Unreal Engine's like code base. So it's up to you how you want to handle that. So let's create an island. I've never actually created an island in a session like this before. I'm going to pull this up and let's do something a little bit different. What could possibly go wrong? And gonna pull that out there. One thing as well that I should point out here is that if you want to, you can actually create additional layers that you kind of stack on top of things. Oh, there it is. Sorry, folks. That'll teach me to make an island. Give it just 2 seconds. Sorry about that. I'm just going to open my demo map. Cool. We're only a couple of steps behind where we were, so it's fine. So I'm just going to rip these upwards. Now, one thing that I'd like to get into to just show you that it's doable is if you wanted to, you can get something like this and nothing stops me from um, nothing stops me from getting this setup that we have and going to landscape and actually adding an additional layer of the top that I'm just going to call fixed areas. So the cool thing with that is that I can go fixed areas, and now I can actually just paint over the top of what we've got. So what I mean by that is, if we're looking at this landmass stuff and it gets us 90% of the way there, well, maybe I want to have just paint this information in, or maybe I want to ramp it from here to here, say add ramp, and that will now actually add a ramped area to it. Maybe I want to run some custom erosion in these areas specifically. And we have a bunch of other systems that are built in for things like rivers and such. So we can go pretty far with how these things are set up. But being able to have this layer over the top is quite cool in my opinion, because I can have this and then I can be like nah or yeah. So and I can't do that at runtime, I gotta warn you. But being able to like make changes and make modifications and tests and things like that. This is just really useful to kind of have a non-destructive workflow for how your environment is meant to look. So I can go back to here and I'm going to go ramp and I'm going to connect this to this. Ramp is a really useful tool that no one seems to know about, because you can just click on 2 points and say, please build a flat line between the two of them, and you can control what the fall off looks like. So I can kind of build them and hit add, and it will now add a softer looking path. One of the cool features that is here as well that I'm not using today is you can also use landmass to paint splines. So you can actually just paint the roads directly with landmass as a separate layer. So you can actually go here and I could add a blueprint brush and say make it landmass, and I'm just going to paint it there. But instead of painting an outline, you can actually tell it to paint a spline mesh. So if you see my screen right there, painting in a spline mesh allows you to actually paint in a straight path between two locations, which means that you could have comfortably, I'm going to say cap shape. Oh, and I got it again. I think this is the curves that are potentially kicking it, so I'm going to kill the curve that I put onto the island. As I said, the landmass system is pretty new. It's experimental, so it's a little bit touchy. Curves in particular seem like they're a bit touchy, I've noticed, so that could be what's killing it, because this is it shouldn't be as bad as it is. So we'll give this just 2 seconds. Cool. I'm just going to turn off curves on the one that had it. So disable that. Great. So this is generally pretty well set up. I think I had all of these. I think I pulled this myself to there. Sorry about that, folks. Cool. That'll do for the minute. But as I said, if you wanted to, there's nothing that stops you from having a landmass brush that was actually, I could cheat a bit and I could grab one of these existing ones. So if I was to grab this brush that was here, and I was to go up and I was to turn this one into a spline mesh, notice it's now painted just the rim around there. And I could comfortably get this and say, hey, I want to have a path that goes from here that pulls down, and then I could grab these points and I could pull them down as well. So I could say, all right, that's a good start, but then I want to pull this down further, and then I want to get this one and pull this down further, and pull this down further. And then let's straighten this off to here for some reason. So see how that's actually able to kind of pull these things in? And you can go through and you can modify this in whatever way you need to. So, you know, once again, I can look at this and say, all right, that's cool. That's cool, but maybe instead of being a spline mesh, you know, we want to go through and we want to change the fall off to be maybe a super aggressive angle, or either a very lightweight angle or a super aggressive angle where it's just like carving it straight down to that location. It's up to us how we kind of want to handle this stuff, but being able to kind of do setups like that is, you know, again, really, really powerful. I think 45 is probably looking all right. It's not ideal, but it still gives you an idea. And while I'm using this for a road, nothing stops you using that from a river, right? You know, because you're just kind of grabbing these and pulling them around. So at any point, I could have this going out into the sea. Created a really strange setup there, but I guess it still kind of demonstrates the point, right? You know, and the final thing to note here is nothing stops you from running additional layers over the top of all of this. So what I mean by that is if I wanted to create another layer and just call this like general noise, I could go through to my sculpt, and under paint, I could add a material only landmass. And material only actually just adds just straight noise. So see how everything got bumpier? So it actually just kind of runs an additional pass. I may want to do this at the start, but I may also potentially want to do this before I do the other layers. So see now these other layers are stacked on top of that noise. So I can choose at what point I want to kind of run it, and I can control this accordingly. So I could say, hey, you know, everything else is painting it, but I want to have really crazy elevation differences when it comes to the ocean layer and how that's all kind of painted in. Or if I want to say, look, you know, I could be like, all right, I want variation in the ocean, but I don't want it to be like obscene. So off, on, off, on, and that kind of setup is just, again, you know, really really useful. One thing that is, well, it's important in interior environments, I personally think is more important in exterior environments, is setting up a couple of bookmarks. So find some spaces that we want to make sure look good. So I'm going to put my camera here. I'm going to hit Control 1. I'm going to put my camera maybe here as a general, Control 2. And maybe over here, I'm going to get, that's pretty lame. Looking a bit better, Control 3. And then I can just press 1, 2, and 3 to switch between those bookmarks at any time. And that's, you know, just really useful because it means I can just keep track of things. And if I want to take screenshots from the same location and things like that, this is advantageous. So we've kind of got ourselves a cool little island going on here. Props to whoever it was that suggested I make an island, because I've literally never done this before, but that actually is quite cool. So let's go ahead and do that. If we're going to make this a environment though, let's go ahead and set up the rest of this such that it has the appropriate extra elements in there. Okay, so it's time that we go ahead and we make a material called, I'm going to call this simple landscape. Someone's asked if you get close to the sun. Oh yeah. So yeah, the sun is considered infinitely far away. You can't reach into it. We don't have some sick giant ball of gas renderer that's tucked away in the engine. I'm sorry, not by default. You know, yet. So we've got this in. It's time for us to create a landscape. And to go about creating a landscape, there's a few ways that we can do it. Now, generally, when you're painting stuff in Unreal, and you're creating an environment, what folks expect is to be able to go to here and say, all right, where are some textures? And they look at these various textures, and they might say to themselves, okay, I want to set this up to have, let's use this forest path. Let's get this dirty forest path and set this to be the default. You know, and consequently, a lot of folks would just grab those and they would drag them into their material that they're creating. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just that it won't give you the best results, because doing a little bit of material wizardry can go a long way. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to just plug in a few things. So I'm just going to plug in the base color. I'm going to plug in the normal. I know the alpha of this is the roughness. One of the things that clued me in is it's called _D_R. And typically when you see a naming convention like that, it's suggesting that that's how it's meant to go in. So I'm going to say alpha to roughness. This other one here is a height map. I'm not going to touch that one just yet. But we can see that that's generally working. And, you know, like I said, a lot of folks would look at this and they would say to themselves, all right, so I guess we're just going to apply this. And we can. You know, I can save the landscape and I can click on it and I can set the landscape material to be the simple landscape and kind of apply that. And this is what we get. But this is kind of ugly. Because look at the amount of tiling we've got going on here. By the way, even though I'm making an island, it's about to be an alpine island, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense conceptually, but I hope we're all okay with this. So anyway, so you know we can see that we've got this going on, and all right, so they're getting a lot of tiling. And there's a cool, you know, you can add a landscape coordinate node, which allows you to set things up. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of the height one. It allows you to set things up with different scales. So I could say, hey, show me what this looks like with a scale of 10. And when I go to here and I click apply, I can see what it looks like. And the funny thing is this doesn't look great up close. Like, look at that. Ugh. But in the distance, that actually looks all right. It's not great, but it looks all right. Like, we don't notice the tiling too much. And if there was multiple materials working together, it'd be pretty well hidden. So if you think about what we've actually got here, it would be almost ideal if we could have this version of the material whenever we're up close, far away, and the original version of the material that I set up a second ago whenever we are up close. You know what I mean? So a version of it that tiles in one sense, and a version of it that doesn't tile so much in the other. And the cool thing is that's totally doable. If we look at how I set up the materials the other day, which was to break them into smaller materials, I can do the same thing again here. So I can right click and I can call set material attributes. And I'm going to set this up to just take in a base color, a roughness, and a normal. Oops. That could have been bad. So base color, roughness, normal. And that is now the far away material. And I can do the same thing over here and say this is my close material. And what's really great about this is by getting this and setting it up this way, I can then call blend material attributes. And I can say, in one situation, I want to have things that look like this, and in one situation, I want them to look like this. And to blend between them, I want to use a node called a distance blend, which just says, actually, if I preview this, you'll see it. It says, given a certain range and an offset, it'll blend from one thing to another. See, it's going from black to white here. And that's actually all we want. You know, I just want to plug that straight in. So we're going to have this blend, this black to white, and I just want to set up a couple of values to say dirt blend range. So let's set up the blend range to take place over the course of, I don't know, 10 meters. And let's say the dirt blend offset doesn't start tiling until 15 meters away from you. Okay, so if I go back to what we have now, okay, funny story, I did it completely backwards, but we can see that it's working. It's switching from the big one to the little one. I just made the mistake of the fact that it's the little one that we want up close and the big one that we want when we're far away. few ways that I could change that, but the quickest and easiest way is for me to literally just swap these around. That's a good job. There we go. So now when I'm here, it looks like this, but when you move far away, we get to that version. I actually feel like maybe even increasing the tiling for the far away version might benefit us a bit. So I might actually set this to be even bigger tiling. Dare I say 15. And I think we can probably get away with this being around 4 or 5 even. So that you can see I'm kind of switching. And you'll notice, you'll notice it if you're looking for it, right? But the truth is like your average person that's only moving at this pace isn't really going to see it. We've started to alleviate some of those tiling issues, which is useful. So, all right, that's kind of cool, kind of useful. But what can we do from here? How do we go about the rest? And how do we paint in grass? And the great thing is the in-engine setup for doing an extra layer is actually really simple. So let's just shelve this dirt for just a second, and I'm gonna duplicate everything that I've got. But this one is now going to be for my my grass layer. So I'm just going to make another material inside of this one, and I'm going to set these to be grass. And I'm going to set up the normals. And now we've got ourselves a reasonably simple grass setup, okay? Not super pretty, should do the trick though. Now, sometimes we want dirt, sometimes we want grass. Fortunately, there's a system built in that allows you to create a landscape layer blend. That allows you to just add layers to it. So I can add one and say, this is a dirt layer. And I can add another one. And I can say, this is a grass layer. Okay, so with this set up, with our dirt and with our grass, I'm now able to actually paint in either of those things. And let's take a quick look at what that looks like. So when I go back here, it's going to look like we've got problems. Wow, more true than I knew. This is cause for concern. I'm wondering if it's OBS that's been causing this instability, because I can run this completely stably right up until the point that I'm streaming to everybody here, at which point this happens. Alright, so that's all plugged in still. Everything is theoretically still fine. I'm just now going to apply the simple landscape material. Now, everything looks like it's no longer working. But what's actually happening with what we're seeing here is the landscape material needs to actually have this information painted into it. Which is fortunately pretty easy. I'm going to create a new layer that is just going to be called paint. And you can see if I go to paint mode that we have dirt and grass as options. So to paint information in, you need to create something called a weight blend. So I'm just going to create that. Just going to save it to the default layer. It creates a layer info. It's literally just you need to click add and then OK. So dirt and grass. And the advantage of doing this is that now I'm able to kind of select this stuff. And if you click and we give it just a second, it'll then paint grass into the area, which is doing the same techniques that we saw before. I actually think we could go even more aggressive on this grass blend. So, you know, I can kind of step through this. I can start to get some of this kind of painted in. And this works reasonably well. And you can shift click to remove it so that it kind of paints it out again. So kind of generally painting that. Actually, we probably want to eventually make this seabed since I'm apparently making an island. And again, you know, we can mix and match these as we see fit. And all right, that's kind of useful. We can see where the value in that is. But what I would love to be able to do here is to I would love to be able to kind of more distinctly control this, and I would also love to be able to actually have not just bright green grass like what we see right now, but instead I wish that this grass was actual grass. So I would love it if this actually painted in some meshing that would look like grass. So the question is you know, how do we go ahead and do that? The great news is that it's actually pretty simple. So check this out. If I was to create, if I was to get my island like this, and I was to create a thing. I'm gonna go to my content browser. I'm gonna right click, and now the grass that I want to paint into the world is this field grass that you can see right here. Okay, now this field grass, give it a second to compile its material. You know, a lot of people would think to themselves, all right, I saw Chris paint in the trash bags yesterday. If you don't have context, that sounds like a really weird sentence, but there were literal bags of trash. But you know, I saw Chris paint in the foliage yesterday by going to foliage, and I need to paint grass in, so the obvious thing for me to paint grass in is to drop that in and then start painting grass, right? You know, I mean, why wouldn't that be the case? You just paint that in. But that's actually not the right way to do grass, because that would take forever and be a giant waste of everybody's time. What I suggest you do instead is you create... I'm saving profusely now because of the instabilities we were seeing earlier. What you should do instead is right click and go to foliage. And you see an option here called landscape grass, which sounds pretty much like what we want. And I'm going to call this generic grass. And if I was to add a generic grass, you can actually see that we can set up all sorts of rule sets for what this generic grass should look like. Okay, so if I just plug these values in, I'm going to hit save and just keep it all generic for the time being. I'll turn off the ability to receive decals. Keep it all generic for the time being. Watch what happens if I go back to my landscape and I create a new landscape grass output. And the cool thing is this lets me actually set up paint rules that paint grass in. Whenever a value is above 0, it's going to start to look at painting grass into the world for me. Whenever a value is equal to 0, it says no grass. And the cool thing with that is I can actually do a search for a landscape sample and say, look up the data. Whoop, I'm going to spell that correctly. Look up the data for grass. And the grass that I want you to paint in is the generic grass that we just created. And if we go back to this, give it just a second to compile. That will now automatically go through and start applying this grass to the landscape. anywhere the grass is as well. So, and we can control the density and the rule sets for this too, which is really useful. You know, like if I wanted to get this and I wanted to say to the grass, hey, let's cull you earlier. I can do that, and it's just going to change it accordingly. Or I could say, hey, I want you to start culling at from 500 units away. So it starts to kind of remove it, you know, thins out the grass. So up close it still looks okay, but as we get further and further away, it starts to kind of clean things up. And like this to me is just like super valuable. One thing that's worthy of note for game developers out there is if you're trying to make a game for mobile, for instance, and you want grass, but you just want less grass on mobile, you can actually click this button and say, hey, on mobile, I want you to set the setting to this. And on Linux, I want you to set it to this, or Android, or iOS, or whatever it may be. So you can actually set certain settings up so that they override for certain devices, which allows you to more comfortably you know, kind of set things. Someone's asked, you know, if you're doing specific areas for a shot, can you paint things in manually? Yeah, you can. But it depends on what you're making, right? You know, if you want to hand paint everything, that's totally fine. But sometimes it's just way easier to do what I'm doing here. So it's up to you whether you want to let the engine just paint it. Because like if I was not explaining what I just did, this would be about 10 minutes of work. And for it, I can get some pretty good results. I'm going to show you, after the last session, we had a pretty cool thing come through, and I'm going to show you how to get better results out of this grass so that it blends in nicely instead of just kind of being that really stark contrast. But the thing that I really want to stress here is that, you know, if I was in landscape mode and I was in dirt painting mode and I painted in some dirt, there's now no longer a mesh at that location. So I can't stress this enough, is like the savings that we get from doing it this way is pretty considerable. Because I can just, you know, and we can kind of create those patches, and where possible we can counter paint. So actually, you know, I want some more grass on that hill there, but I want a little bit over here. And that means we can thin it out. And once I get the blending set up on this properly in a little bit, it'll look a lot nicer. The first of these blending fixes that you may want to consider making is there's a nice little option in the engine. Notice how the LODs are popping. So notice that as I move away, it's switching between different levels of detail on the grass, and we can kind of see that really ugly line feeding through. We can fix that super easily by just opening up the grass material. And there's a setting called Dither LOD Transitions. And if you turn this on, it'll now fade the grass from one to the other. It's worth noting as well, this isn't too important for Sequencer, because in Sequencer you can actually tell it for the final renders to only use LOD 0, so everything stays super high detail when you're doing your final actual output. But this is still good in keeping your general frame time as something that's a bit more reasonable. So I'll give this just a second. And now you'll see it's building LOD 0, then LOD 1. Then LOD 2. And as I pull away, it's now kind of gently fading between them. So you can still see it, but once we get more foliage and such in there, it should be a bit harder for us to see. So that's good. The next thing I want to teach you, though, is procedural foliage. So I really want to teach folks how to not have to make an entire landscapes forest, because that just takes time. So how do we do it? So there's a cool thing in the engine, and that is that if you wanted to paint in, let's say you wanted to paint in some trees. Again, a lot of folks would think to themselves, all right, here are the trees, so I guess I need to go to foliage mode. And I want to paint these trees in. Excuse me, hiccups. I want to paint in these trees, you know, so they would think to themselves, all right, so I guess I just drag that into foliage. And then we're just going to paint in trees. Side note, that density may have been slightly too high. One moment, just gonna unpaint those trees. Gonna drop that density down a bit. Even 10 is ridiculous. Okay. So, they might think to themselves, all right, so I just want to kind of paint in some trees. And, you could. This would work. This would work, but it's going to, if you have a 10 by 10 kilometer space, do you really want to paint in every tree? Doesn't that just sound bad? Instead, what we can do that's really useful is we can create foliage types. So just then when I dragged in these trees, I was able to actually save this as a foliage type. I'm going to create it manually just so it's a bit easier for me to step through things. But basically foliage types allow you to create rule sets for what this tree is like whenever it's getting painted. But it allows you to do something else. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to foliage, and I'm going to create a new static mesh foliage. And I'm going to call this tree foliage 01. Okay. Now from here, I can just select the tree. And I can set up rules. Okay. We have placement rules, which allows me to set things like the default density values. And we have like other settings as well, right? But the reason I wanted to bring this up, and one of these features that you can do is inclusion layers and exclusion layers. So I could tell this tree that it can only grow on grass. Or I could tell this tree that it never grows on, I don't know, lava. So, we could set up certain rule sets here to give it more intelligent placement, which is really powerful. But I don't want to do that right now. I'm just going to set up these basic settings, and you can see we have placement and the instance. But if you were to go to your editor preferences and go to experimental, you'll see that we have a thing here called procedural foliage. Okay. And when I turn on procedural foliage, what we get when I reopen up this foliage asset is you'll see that we have a new category called procedural. Now, when you do procedural, you can actually check all sorts of cool stuff, because I can go to here and I can say, I want to set this tree casts shade of 3 meters, and it collides with anything that is within a 1 meter radius. I can say this tree spreads its seed quite far. Let's say it spreads its seed by 5 meter radius. Okay. And it spreads 3 seeds every generation. It cannot grow in the shade. So whenever it gets into the shade, it stops growing. And this is what its growth curve looks like. We don't want to go from 1 to 3 or we're going to end up with some giant trees. So let's go from 0.7 to like 1.25. Anyway, I'm going to click save and I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to make a tree foliage 2. This time I'm going to set it to the other tree. Hit save. Similar rules should apply. Shade radius is probably thinner for this one. Cool. So with these 2 trees set up, I'm also going to go ahead and really quickly set up the bushes, which I kind of feel like just using default settings and see how it goes. So we're going to get bush 1, which is the myrtle bush. I can spell myrtle. The shade radius on these is probably a bit lower, and the collision radius is probably about 50 centimeters. Also, I imagine bushes propagate quite a lot. I actually don't know much about these things, but let's just assume that there's 5 or even 6 seeds per step. So we got our first bush. I'm going to say the bushes can grow in the shade still as well. So I'm going to say they can grow in the shade, but they can't spawn in the shade. And then I'm just going to quietly hope that that setting is good. And I'm just going to make a bush 2 that is the other bush. And I'm going to make a bush 3. Which is the other bush. So we have 3 bushes, 2 sets of trees, a couple of hopes and dreams. Let's see what this does. So if I go to here, I'm now able to add a procedural foliage volume. And when I add a procedural foliage volume, I'm just going to tell this procedural foliage volume to be big. I'll just type this in manually. So I just want this volume to kind of encompass the whole area. Now, with that set up, it needs to have a spawner. And a spawner is basically just a collection of things that says, what foliage do you want me to spawn in this area? So I'm just going to do generic forest. And we're just going to add all of the elements that we just created. I know you're like, oh, Chris, this takes forever. But, you know, you do it one time, you hit go, and we just planted a forest across the entire landscape. And, you know, this is now putting these in weird spots because we actually want to set up some other rules as well. So we can set up rule sets that say how it plants trees. Remember we had the grass and the dirt layers? So, you know, if I wanted to, I could tell these layers under inclusion, I could say the grass has to be at least 0.5%. Or I could say exclusion layers. So I could say, hey, don't paint them on dirt. You know, it's up to you whether you want an okay list or a bad list. But so if I was to set this tree up as dirt, any dirt higher than 0.5 we'll call it, so we can still have it on the blends. If I was to run this again, notice that a bunch of those trees just disappeared from anywhere there's dirt. So we're now only ending up with trees in some of these nicer areas. And you know, I might do that for all of them really quickly. I'm just going to set the dirt as an exclusion layer. Cool. So I'm just going to add exclusion layer, dirt. Bushes are going to be 0.8 or above is considered bad for bushes. Sorry, I should have done that for all of them. Yeah, and I'm kind of fudging these numbers as I go along. They're just random, really. But hopefully it's still, you know. And when I click sim, it'll go through, and you'll see that we're now losing all the trees that were previously here, right? But we're starting to get something. Now, the first of these things that I really want folks to be aware of is this setting that just came out is not what you want for your lighting. So if I go back to my, my foliage mode, one of the cool things with this is if I check, see these, turn them on, if I shift click, you'll notice it actually lets me paint and unpaint any of these foliage pieces. So I can actually touch it up using the foliage painter. So I can set that up as I want. But the other thing that's really important that folks are aware of is by default, these don't cast what's called a distance field shadow. So you need to turn this option on. See where it says affect distance field lighting? Watch the forest as I turn this on. Okay, affect distance field lighting, on. Notice that just kind of really filled out a lot of the shadows and stuff that we're seeing. Off, on, off. Definitely have it on. Okay, so we've got that kind of really quickly set up. The other thing I'm going to change at this point, just moving forward, is I'm going to set my my default. I'm just going to hard code in an exposure level for us to work with, just so it's a little bit friendlier moving forward. But as I said, like, you know, we can touch up any of these bits here. So if we're looking at this and we're like, oh, I sure wish I had some more bushes on this specific dirt area, I could go to the bushes and I could, they've still got their inclusion layers. I could turn off their inclusion layers and just paint them into an area, you know. Or I could choose to unpaint them from this area over here, or to paint them in really high density over here. So it's up to me how I kind of want to drive some settings like that. Another thing I would like to do in this general environment that we've set up is it's probably a good idea for me to place some sort of large-scale water body around me. So I might just do a really quick material that just looks passable for that. So I'm just kind of throwing this one in. We'll see how we go. Going to set a value that is called color. Just going to plug into here. And it's going to sound silly, but ideally what I probably want right now is the best water is made from rocks. And I know that sounds silly, but believe me, it's the case. There you go. I'm telling you, we're going to get some sweet rock water. So if you look at that, I've just added the rock bumps to a really simple material that's just super reflective. If I was to get the world's position, and if I was to get the world's position and I was to add a panner so that this was slowly moving. Oops, I should probably plug it in. I hear that's what good materials do. Okay, 0.2 is way too high. I just want to get a really calm C. Yeah, that works. So if I wanted to, I could get this. I'm going to duplicate it and get one going a different direction. Cool. Get those two. And I just want to blend these two normal maps together. What I'm basically doing is just getting two rock motions so that we end up with something that's a bit more like that. And now I can have a nice variable here that's going to be I want to create a variable that I'm just going to call like water edginess. There's a better phrase for that, but let's just roll with this. And edginess is probably with an I. Is edginess even? Edginess isn't even a word. All right, let's just set this to 0.25. So again, like, yeah, I'm just kind of quickly just throwing something together. There are water materials that you can examine that are on the marketplace that may be a better option. But we now have a nice elegant system where, you know, if I added a couple more of these layers as well at different scales, this would look a little bit nicer. If I really wanted to do this well, I would use some Gerstner waves, which again, it's all just out of the box in the latest version of Unreal. But if I now just got a plane, I want to make this an incredibly big plane, like just stupidly big. And I applied the water body. I have some basics going on. Cool. So I just want to get you. It's just so we can complete our island setup. I accidentally painted some trees underwater. This is fine. Cool. So I'm just kind of throwing this in really quickly. Cool. So we've got that normal setup, and we have a basic color setup that I can dial in just a little bit. Last little thing that I would like to do here is, look, again, I know I'm throwing this together really quickly, so don't stress about what I'm doing as like, oh, hey, how do I copy this? The material that I'm about to create, it's worth noting, if you open the landmass plugin, there is a material called River. And this is actually a river material that you can pretty much just copy these settings out wholesale, and everything should work for a reasonable looking fluid. So I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to set this to single layer water. But as I said, like the newer version of UE should make this a much nicer general system. When I apply this, we should see proper shading going on now. Once I kind of dial in the colors as appropriate. Cool. And now I just want to dial in the colors. We probably want to have an actual cube map that's being portrayed in this as well, that we're currently not getting. I'm just going to have this as a really quick setup because I don't have time to go into a proper advanced setup that will look a bit nicer, but I just generally wanted to have something going so that when we're up where we need to be, we can generally see how stuff looks. Cool. And again, if we want to change the tiling pattern of that so that it looks a bit nicer because we're only ever going to see it from a distance, I can change that too pretty easily. This. We can now pull that across to how we want it to be, which involves me grabbing this and finding a scale that's generally going to work for what it is that we're creating. Normally we would obviously set up a proper shoreline and everything else as well. I just kind of wanted to just get this one going, just so we had something there. Cool. So the with that in mind and that generally set, it's time that we start looking at getting everything to kind of work together in a much nicer way. How are we going for time at the moment? Are we doing okay, Alex?
Yep. You're about an hour 20.
Hour and 20. Okay, cool. So the next thing that I want to quickly touch on is Quixel Bridge. So I'm going to launch a program. I'm going to launch a program called Bridge. Now this is completely free for Unreal Engine developers. It's a massive repository. Really wants to download the latest update. Bridge has a lot of updates. I think it's like it's always asking me. But anyway, what we have here is bridge works like this. Let's say we're making a scene and we wanted to do something to do with the beach. Okay. Now, if we did a search for something that was at the beach, I launched 2 versions of bridge somehow. That was a good trick, Chris. If I wanted to do something to do with the beach, I could literally just type in the word beach and hit enter. And this is going to give me assets. It's going to give me photogrammetry scans of, like, this is from a Thai beach, I guess, because specifically it's not just beach sand, it's Thai beach sand. You know, I can scroll through all of these assets. I can see 3D models. I can see anything that I might potentially kind of want to pull down. And this is really, really powerful, you know, because you can just kind of find stuff that you may want. You can set things up and just, this is all free for you to use inside of your, inside of your projects. But what I'd first recommend doing is, get a feel for this, kind of work through things. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull in a few assets that I've already downloaded. So, oh, that's interesting. It's getting me to sign back in again, folks. I'll be one moment. That was a good trick. It signed itself out sometime between an hour ago and now. All right, and we are now signed in again. So if I click on something like this, I can go through and I can set up any of the settings that I may want. You need to make sure that you're pointing it towards your current build of Unreal, of whatever it is that you're doing. In this case, I'm working on an open world workshop, and I want to make sure that I'm pulling down. Let's have a look at what I've got in my purchased section. That one's probably a good case. So we're going to say, hey, I want to get this. I personally don't think I need to have as many LODs as we're seeing here, so I might just grab LOD 1 and LOD 2. You set any textures that you want to pull down as well. So normal map, roughness, potentially displacement map, anything like that. Then you just click download. And what this will do is in background, it will kick up a download and it will pull down this asset. And this is going to grab a like a high quality. It's going to download for me. One moment, folks. Engine version is 4.25. I don't know how that got reverted. But yep, I'm going to plug that in and I'm just going to click export. It's going to say exporting to Unreal Engine. Successful. And if I go back to here, you'll now see that we have the asset coming in. Give it just a second. That's what I get for importing 4K textures. Probably should have gone 2K, but that's okay. In the meantime, are there any questions that have popped up so far, Alex, that we should be fielding just while this is handling its import?
Not too many. I've been fielding most of them. Just a lot of questions about what happens between the idea of interior and exterior environments and project settings. How do you, I guess, balance the needs of either or if you've got different types of scenes?
Yeah, I mean that's a really great question. I mean, and it really comes down to like how you're setting things up and what kind of interior and exterior we're going with. Ray tracing is honestly a really good solution for a lot of that stuff because it's just naturally going to work better for certain things. Like it's just naturally going to be able to have realistic lighting in all conditions. So setups like that are obviously really beneficial to film. So you can see here that this just brought the assets straight in that we created. But what I would like to point out is, you're working with assets like this and, you can now just drop them in and set things up. But there's definitely, there's a couple of really important tricks that are worth knowing when it comes to kind of building this stuff. and that is that like getting nice accurate blends is pretty important, because if you just have like a rock like this in the middle of the field, look, it looks good, right? But it mostly looks good if I do this. The second I do this, you're like, nah. So someone just asked, sorry, what does LOD and different LOD numbers refer to? That's actually a really great question, and probably something I should have covered. So an LOD works like this. If we look at this asset, it is a 18,000 try asset, okay? But if I was to click here, I can see that there's now also a LOD 1 that is 14K and LOD 2 that is 10K. And that's because LOD stands for level of detail. So, it gives us like versions that are going to look fine when you're all the way back here, but they're actually much cheaper to use. And you can see that when I have this enabled, it's switching between my LOD 0, my LOD 1, and my LOD 2, but you're not really seeing it. One of the really important things to know is that Unreal actually has automatic generation of LODs built in. This is a pretty cool feature that's somewhat unique to Unreal. I'm not aware of any other engines that have this built in, but you can actually tell the engine to say, hey, I want to have 5 LODs, and then click apply. And the engine will actually run an algorithm that will generate lower polys. So they just generate a 5,000 and a 2,000 poly LOD as well. And the cool thing is like it just did all of that by itself. So it just, that instead of having to have an artist go through and like manually create all of the LODs, it gave me cheaper and cheaper versions that I can use for different levels of detail. So this is really, really useful to just have in engine, because where an artist would often spend a lot of time laboriously creating versions of the assets that are cheaper when they're far away, our technology just does, which is great. So I've got this in. However, the next issue that I've got with an asset like this, though, is, as I said, we need to deal with blending. And there are a few ways that you can deal with blending. The best way is tragically the most complicated way. But for this presentation, I really want to expose people to this idea of runtime virtual textures. So what we're about to do is imagine that you were looking at the island from this perspective, and it had no grass and it had no rocks or anything on it. It was just the landscape. And what we did is we saved the result for every single color that we could see. That's essentially what we're doing. We're going to be taking the ability to basically take a screenshot that is of any pixel that we see, and we're going to save them. But more importantly, we're going to let any other asset in the engine look at that texture and say, at my own location, what does the landscape beneath me look like? Okay, this is really, really powerful to know about, because if it can say, what does the landscape beneath me look like? What it's essentially able to do is then say, okay, blend my color with its color. Okay, now that screenshot, that top-down image is called a runtime virtual texture. And a runtime virtual texture is you've got to do a couple of things to create them. I'm suddenly panicking because I'm not sure if I turn them on. I did, everything's fine. So you need to make sure they're turned on in your rendering settings. And there was definitely a moment of panic there. So first thing you need to do is make sure that virtual textures are turned on. The next thing you need to do is you need to create your virtual textures. So in this case, I'm going to create a runtime virtual texture. And I'm going to call this RVT_environment. Okay, so RVT environment is going to eventually have all of the information for what the world looks like when you take a top-down image of it. I'm also going to improve the overall quality of it. Save. I'm going to make sure that it knows that the information I want to have is the base color, normal, roughness, and specular. Okay. If you wanted to, you could tell it just to get the color, but I personally like getting the entire material. Okay. So this part is set up. We've now got a runtime virtual texture to save to. The next thing we need to do is we need to get the landscapes material to tell the engine to Someone just said they had to take a walk away from reacting to the LOD feature. Yeah, that LOD one click saves literally months of work for what would otherwise be interns on a project. Anyway, so we've got this set up. What we need to do now is go to our simple landscape, and we need to create what's called a virtual texture output. So this basically says when you're taking a photo of me, which information do you want to save? Okay, and in this situation, it's actually pretty easy, because I want to get this landscape information, but I want to tell it that the information that we care about, okay, the information that we care about is going to be this info, but specifically, it's going to be the it's going to be the color, the specular, and the roughness. So we're just going to get this, and we're going to say, hey, when you ask me for these things, when you ask me for my color, give me this. Specular, give me this. Roughness, give me this. And I'm just going to say base, spec, rough. Now, one other thing that's really useful is normal. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to do this the wrong way first and then do it the right way in a little bit. But this will be useful down the track. So we've actually just gone ahead and we've said, hey, save this information to this whenever you do it. Okay? Now, with this set, the next thing I need to do, and I know there's a few steps here, so you have my apologies, but I swear once you get it set up one time, everything goes great. I'm going to drag in a runtime virtual texture volume. And this basically says, this is the area that I want to take those photographs of. You know, this is the area that I actually care about that. I want to make this as big as the landscape. RVT volumes have a nice little feature that literally lets you click on the landscape and say, make it that big. And if we zoom out, you can now see that it's actually created a volume the exact size of the landscape, which is wonderful. All right, so that's plugged in, okay? It says, which virtual texture do you want me to save to? And I say, save to the environment texture. And the last thing I need to do, and I know there are steps here, is I need to go to my landscape and tell it, please contribute to this texture. And you can see the second I clicked that, we now have this little image down here which represents what the RVT is going to look like. So we know that it's working. Now, if we want to get an idea of what this looks like, I'm going to open up the material for our Icelandic terrain for a second. And I'm going to open up the material for our Icelandic terrain. And I'm actually just going to plug the runtime virtual texture straight into it. So I'm just going to say, hey, sample the runtime virtual texture, sample the environment. And a cool thing you can do is you can say to this, all right, so we're sampling this, and instead of plugging these all in directly, I'm going to use that workflow that I've been kind of running for these last few sessions, which is to create mini materials and blend them together. I need base color, metallic, spec, rough norm. So I've created the existing material, is just done there. And now I'm going to do the same thing over here where I say, hey, get the base color and the specular and the roughness and the normal. I'm just going to remove the metallic from even existing. And just plug this in. Now, this is going to break everything initially, but that's okay, because you're going to see the first result. And notice this now has the color of this. And as I move it around, it's actually just setting its colors to be whatever is beneath it. Do you see that? So this is useful, because we can now get this information. Now, the first little thing that I want to fix, and this is potentially being a little pedantic, is see we're still not getting this smooth transition here. That's because the normals need to be lined up. Now, what I'm about to do is going to seem a bit weird if you don't know transforms and how they work. But basically, we want to save the normal in this landscape with the world in the world's point of reference, so as world space. All you need to do is drop in a transform node. Every now and then it will complain that it needs to have it as RGB, and you can do that by just telling it to only get the RGB channels with a component mask. And again, like what I'm doing here is a more advanced feature, so you know you're gonna have to look up tutorials for it. There's a couple of really good ones online. Polo Souza had a really great video on this exact topic that you're more than welcome to look at. But what I've just done is we're now saving the normal as the world normal. So I'm going to tell this, get the incoming normal, treat it as a world normal, and convert it back into tangent space. And what this will do is this will actually line up the direction of the world with the direction of the surface. So again, don't feel bad, but notice that line that I was looking at before, I can't see it. It's not there. So that's actually created a perfectly smooth blend between those two assets. Now the last part here is actually really cool, because if you think about what we've got right now, we're blending from one to blending to the other. What I need to do is I need to tell this thing, hey, I want you to blend. I want you to blend from this to this whenever you're close to the ground. Okay, so this is the really, really spectacular thing, is that I want to actually look at the ground position and see how close it is to my own position. And if we're basically touching the ground, put the ground in my place. But if we're essentially touching, if we've moved away from the ground, become what the asset originally was. So the really great thing is, remember this blend, the distance blend that we had before? We're actually doing really similar logic to that under the hood. However, for me to look at how close I am to the ground, I actually need to save one extra bit of information. I don't just need to get the color information, I need to also save world height. So I'm going to say, well, what's my world position? Specifically, what is my height, which is my Z axis, my B channel? And just tell it to save this information as well. Okay? So that's now saying save my height information as well. I need to create another runtime virtual texture whose sole job is to store the height data. So rvt underscore height is what I'll call it. So tell it to store the height. And in my, that volume that we had, the RVT volume, there it is. So in this volume that's covering the entire space, I'm literally just going to duplicate it and set this to do the same thing but for height, and make sure that my landscape knows that it's outputting height. And again, I know there's a lot of steps involved here. We can see that that's working. But once you set this up one time, everything gets much, much, much easier. So please, please, please keep in mind that this is doable. Because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say to this thing, I want to get the height of the world, and I want to find out my world height. So I'm going to look at my world position. Okay, I'm going to look at my world position, and I'm going to subtract. I'm only going to use the B channel because again, we only care about the world's height. Now, my world position minus this world position, which I should do in a separate volume. I'll do as a separate node. Tell it to look at the height. So my height minus this height tells me how close I am to the ground. And I'm going to say divided by, say, 100. And over the first 1 meter from touching the ground, I want to blend these two materials together. So if we look at what this looks like, whenever something is close to the ground, it's going to be a value of 0. And whenever something is far away, it's going to be a value of 1. See that? This asset, watch what happens if I lower it into the ground. It's just seamlessly blending straight into the ground now. And as I lift it up, it's kind of projecting in. So see how we've ended up with like a really gorgeous looking setup? And I never have to care about seams again. Now, oh, it just started hailing out front of my house, so hopefully my microphone's not picking that up too much. It also sounds like thunderous applause, which is what I'm going to choose to believe it was with regards to my blending. I know, it's fantastic. So we can see like the power of that, right? Like, see how that's just blended straight in and everything is good. And the funny thing is if you want to, you can run some extra instructions on your. You can reload this back into your material so that everything looks better. But sorry, not looks better. Looks better, but also has fewer instructions because you can actually tell it to load this as your default landscape. So your landscape runs its instructions one time, takes that photo, and it then kind of caches it out. So that's a really, really useful thing there. But the next thing that I want to do here is, all right, so we can see that's working and we can definitely see the advantages of this. But what about if we got that information, that logic, and we applied it to something else? Looking at you, grass. So nothing stops us from doing the same thing. Like nothing stops me from opening up the grass material. Wow, that is incredibly heavy. I gotta warn you that if this cuts off, it's because my house has floated away. You've been warned. So what I'm going to do here is I could tell the grass. So if we look at the grass material, the grass normally looks like the texture for grass looks like this. Turn off the alpha. It looks like this. And what's cool about this is if we wanted, we could start the grass so that it fades from the landscape color up to the correct color. Do you know what I mean? People are talking about tracking my location based on storms. This suddenly got uncomfortable. So what I want to do is blend from the landscape color up to the correct color. And that's actually reasonably straightforward as a problem, because all I need to do is I'm going to put this on a cube. If we look at this y-axis of our UVs, what we see is this. And if we tell this to be the lerp, we can basically say to this asset, whenever this value is white, we want to use the runtime virtual texture. And whenever this is black, we want to use the base color that you intended. So I'm just going to look it up. I'm going to say, hey, oh, sorry, not an output. I want to get a runtime virtual texture sample. Now, one thing you really need to make sure you do when you do this is, because the blades of grass are moving, you need to tell them to get the world position. This world position needs to be excluding offsets, because it needs to be saying, get me my grass's position before you started wiggling it around. Okay. So I'm just going to plug that straight in. And if I connect this, oh, and I need to actually tell it to sample the environment. But let's see how this look. Last time I did this in the session in a slightly different way, so I'm kind of just quietly hoping that this version works. Let's see how this goes. There you go. So see, the bottom of every blade of grass is now taking on the color from where it's coming up. And the cool part of that, if I hide all my trees, is notice that we can't really see the grass anymore. Like, it's actually just softly kind of blending in. And that means that I can actually adjust the color of my grass in my landscape material, and it will adjust the color. It will actually adjust the color of the grass in general, which I think is a really exciting prospect, because I can now dial in exactly how I want this scene to look, but everything just feels a lot more natural for it. And because it's taking in the ground texture, we actually get some really nice natural breakup where as this grass starts to become dirt, it's kind of actually getting the slightly browner color. Funny thing is, if we look at it directly from above, you can almost see the actual texture that's there. But one of the great things about doing it this way as well is, so remember, I'm just going to hide all my foliage for a second. Remember before I went and like really cranked up the grass view distance, because I was like, we need to see grass for forever away. You know, we need to see it all the way over there. The cool thing is, you know, nothing stops me now from opening up my grass and just dialing that right back, which saves a whole lot of overhead. Because I can now be like, all right, maybe the grass only lasts this far. Like, that's half the distance, and I physically can't see the difference because there's no contrast between the grass and the ground anymore. Maybe I want to live dangerously and divide that by 2. I can now kind of see it, but we're still looking pretty good. But because of that, if I want to, I could now dial up the intensity for the grass that's up here. You know, I could have way more like natural grass, and we end up with an environment that just, you know, looks that little bit better. And we're putting the resources where we want to put the resources. You know, we're not dialing those resources into rendering grass all the way out in the distance. We can now choose to put those resources towards dialing it only towards the stuff that's really in front of me, and I personally think that's really useful. So, you know, and we could go a lot further than this as well. Like, we could tell every single tree to automatically blend at the bottom of its roots. You know, nothing stops us from doing that. And again, everything is super responsive here. So if I went back to my simple landscape, and after we do this grass stuff, if I wanted to, I could blend. I could do a override of the base color. So I could get the materials. I could get the grass's color, which is this lighter green. I could multiply it by some sort of value that I'm just going to call grass color. Since I'm multiplying it, I'm just going to set this to 111. Let's set the base color to be whatever is getting brought through here. And we can kind of dial in this grass color now into the RVT. I can't recall if RVTs respond immediately to this value changing. We're about to find out. Yes, unfortunately it's not, but I can set that up pretty quick. So I'm just going to multiply that by a darker green, and we should be able to kind of dial in some of the grass colors that are coming through. Okay. Here we go. So that's now like a darker green that's kind of being brought in, and the grass is sampling it accordingly. To me, that feels a little bit nicer. But you know, again, we're able to kind of choose where we want to put our resources and where's going to be best. So, does your nifty procedural wizardry allow you to not have grass underneath the bushes, or does it always work the other way around? So if you wanted to have shading beneath, if you wanted to have shade beneath the bushes that turned off the grass, you would probably need to handle it in a different way. Out of the box, the grass doesn't know about anything apart from the landscape layers. So, sorry about that one. Cool. So we've got this set up. We have an environment that looks alright. You can generally see where things are going. That's probably it for the real core of what I wanted to kind of cover for a lot of this session. I'm just having a quick look at my notes. There's one other thing that's a good idea, actually. So the other thing is ray trace distance field shadows. So if we look at my sun and we take a quick look at these values, the moment we're using cascaded shadow maps, which is this, it basically creates a dynamic shadow within this value, which gives you a very ultra crisp dynamic shadow. Quite often, if you have large environments, you want to enable this setting here that says distance field distance field shadow. And this will actually give you a slightly simpler shadow, but it's a way less expensive shadow. And the advantage of doing that is we can have like kilometers and kilometers of environment that still has nice shading kind of going on. Also, I went a bit too green and now I'm kind of regretting it. But yeah, so you can have make sure that your lighting is set up to support this, and then you can comfortably push out for kilometers and kilometers, and it should look pretty good. So just ensuring that that's correctly set up goes a long way. I'd say that pretty much brings us to the end of the core section of this this session. So it's time for us to kind of flick over to any questions. But just before I do, one thing that I want to just really highlight is the Learn tab of the Unreal Engine launcher. So I know I harp on about this every time, but if you're inside the launcher and you click this button up here that says Learn, this actually has just a bunch of things that are set up for you to kind of examine how large outdoor environments might work. There's a few of them. Content examples obviously has a pretty nice breakdown of quite a few things, but the mountains is it's a little bit old at this point, so it may not be the best example, but it still isn't too bad. So that is a good idea of just landscapes being set up. It's got this nice icy water and such that are kind of set up around it. For anyone that's looking at compositing digital people into real life environments, the composure framework is really good for that, by the way. I haven't actually brought that up during these sessions, but it is worth noting. So that's just got EXR backgrounds and a character in front. The thing that's worth looking at, though, is going to the marketplace. Oh, actually, sorry, there is one of these samples that I didn't touch on. And please be aware that for what I'm about to show you, you need to make sure you have an absolute beast of a computer set up to handle it. But if you go to the one called A Boy and His Kite, A Boy and His Kite is this massive open world environment. It's a cinematic, like it's a nice little short film that you can open and you can examine everything about it. And it's this gorgeous environment. It's where I pulled some of today's assets from. It's really, 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 really good, but it does require a pretty grunty computer to run it. So make sure that if you're going into this, you're rolling like at least 24 gig of RAM. I would argue 32 gigs is going to be much better. You've got a pretty fast CPU handling it. It says GTX 980, but I still would be just like, please throw everything at it and the kitchen sink. The first time you ever load it as well, it needs to generate some MIPS, which can take up to 30 minutes. So after you've hit open, I don't know, take a coffee break or something. The other thing that's really useful is going to the marketplace. And don't worry, I'm not trying to sell anyone anything, but if you go to the free tab and then go to Epic Games content, under Epic Games content, this is all free stuff for you to pull down. Like, this doesn't cost a cent. One of the really cool things that we released is a while ago we had a game called Paragon that was in production, and it got kind of sunset, unfortunately. So we put the millions of dollars of assets just on the store for free. And one of those environments is this Paragon, Agora, and Monolith environment. So this is kind of like a nice outdoor environmental scene that's a little bit more contained. You can use any of these assets in your own project. I would suggest pulling assets like this for some of your outdoor content. The other really useful thing is honestly just go under free. Make sure you're always checking the free for the month, because once you claim it, you've got it for good. And like at the moment, one of the free for the months is this jungle pack, which is like $60 or $70 normally. And there's nothing wrong with you using these assets in your own short films and pulling apart this environment and examining it. And like I said, it's it's free at the moment. So once you claim it, you've got it, and you can keep it. So please jump onto that. Someone said, are we able to copy specific things from the learn samples? Like the learn samples are free for you to use in other UE projects. Like we have Epic's core philosophy doesn't involve really like monetizing your education. It's much more important to us that you have good, clear-cut resources to use. The other thing to keep in mind here is permanently free. So while we buy out a lot of assets, while we have a lot of assets that we give away free for the month, we actually have a lot of assets that we just give away free permanently. So if you wanted to open up, for instance, like this temperate vegetation pack or anything like that, you can bring those assets into your environments as well. And there's quite a lot of good stuff here as well, including like animals and characters and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. So, give it a look-see. If you feel like putting in, I don't know, a wolf or Pegasus, feel free to put in either of them. You can even put in both. So I hope this generally, like just pointing at some of these resources, was useful. I'm gonna switch over to question and answer time now for us to kind of run through any queries you may have. So I'm just setting that up. One moment. Okay. Is Tony around?
Possibly.
I may have lost Tony for this session, unfortunately. As my headphones slip forward, I look like crazier and crazier. Just like make some landscapes. All right. So it's time for us to switch over to Q&A. If you have any questions about the program or any questions about the projects, please let us know. And we'll do our best to kind of go through here. Not sure if this is too big a question, but how do you affect the movement styles of trees and grass? That's actually a really great question and something I totally should have covered. Let me show you. I have a great sample for that, actually. So if you were to look at the Unreal Engine Learn samples, the same one that I call out every single time, which is content examples. So this project here called Content Examples, it's got a really, really cool environment in it, which is called Pivot Painter 2. And Pivot Painter 2 shows you how to use the Pivot Painter Unreal script to create some really, really cool outdoor environment movement. So how to create like wind kind of softly jostling things inside of it. And let's take a really quick look at that. Sorry, Alex, I promised you Q&A and then I stole it over to this. If we open up Pivot Painter 2, again, this is completely free, we can go into here. And you can see here that we have like one asset that is a nice soft tree with just like a little bit of movement. And then we have this thing that's getting hit by like a storm. We actually have some other demonstrations on how to achieve some really cool effects, like this kind of sprouting out, blossoming thing. And this entire house is being constructed through the same logic, except instead of moving the tree back and forth, we're moving the pieces of where things will to where things should be from a 0 point in space. So that again is just like a really useful resource, and it's called Pivot Painter 2. If you have Houdini or 3ds Max, you can use the script there. It's worth noting that inside of the engine folder of Unreal, we actually have a ton of different content that is just like plugins for different tool sets. That is just like scripts that we use internally. So I suggest kind of checking that one out. I'm gonna switch over to the chat again. Any other questions that you may have? Again, if you have any questions regarding the program or regarding the outdoor environment scenes, whatever it may be. The reason we're running these sessions live is, we didn't want to just give you videos and be like, educate yourselves. We really wanted this to give you the capacity to ask questions and, discuss things, flag things, etc., etc. So please, if you do have any questions, let us know. Oh, I hit the wrong button, and now we have only Tony. Oh, I'm going to get this. There we go. All right. Yeah. So, I was compensating. Just like exclusively Tony. If we ask for the project, we should be able to hit render and get the same result. So the question there is like, what about randomness? We're not going to look at this and be like, aha, your tree is 2 centimeters to the left in your previous final render. Psh, bin. So don't stress about anything like that. Like when we say the same result, we mean like, we can see that it was actually made using our tool and not suspiciously missing some gorgeous volcano that you added in post or something, I guess. I say volcano, but it's more likely to be color grading, I guess. How would you create low gravity environments? I think you can just set a gravity value, can't you? Isn't gravity just a world setting?
Can change that in world settings.
Yeah, there's actually a world setting that just lets you set gravity to 0 or whatever, and then any physics actors you have will behave like that. If you're after it though, unfortunately we don't have gravity that is like arbitrary directions, so you can't tell world gravity it's that way now, or I don't know. TLDR, you can't remake Inception without a bit of engineering work.
You can do the whole Farnsworth method where you rotate the universe around the player.
So the question though is there time to put some cool God rays in? So if you want to do something like God rays, there's a few ways that you could achieve it. The easiest ways are to look at either the fog solution, which would be going back to this fog that we set up before. You can control obviously how foggy it is, but most importantly, if you have a fog actor, so I'm gonna pull this up. So see, we can move this fog around. You can control a lot of that, and then increase the scattering distribution. Sorry, not the scattering distribution, the extinction scale. So you can kind of start to work with things like that, but if you want to go with it, you can also tell certain lights to contribute more to it. So if I told my directional light to increase its volumetric scattering, I'm going to crank it up a whole amount, we can then start to see God rays. Now obviously we have a lot going on here, so the God rays are instead all God ray as opposed to the empty space. So if you want to do it in a screen space solution, you can add a post process, and then under this post process we do have a thing here called, where are you? Light shafts. Light shafts is somewhere right in front of me. I'm just going to search for the word shafts. Oh. Sorry, folks. Yeah, that's right. Light shafts aren't on the post process, they're on the light. Sorry, this value here that says light occlusion, light shaft occlusion, I can turn that on, and I'm going to light shaft bloom as well. There you go. So you can now see that when I turn that on, we get some of these going on. That was actually a really good request there, Prani. I totally forgot to do that. So see how we're kind of like able to get this like nice light kind of filtering through as we stare at the sun. So you can kind of do that. Question here was, how can you vertically align the trees? If you want to do something like vertically aligned trees, you can set that up inside of your when you're creating those foliage types that we had before, or if you're doing it as just painted foliage. Either way this works. Under here, you can actually tell them that the maximum angle that you ever want them to adjust is, I could say don't place trees unless there is a 0 to 20 degree change. And I can actually change certain values here as well to control the maximum angle that they're allowed to tilt themselves when adjusting themselves to the world. Cool. There's a couple of other questions just came in while I was demoing there. Are there any... I've read a lot about multi-user sessions. Do you think you might be able to squeeze in a demonstration in one of the remaining sequencer sessions? Potentially. Wasn't the intention, but maybe. I'm going to get back to you on that one. Maybe. It's not really meant to work over the internet. It's really... well, it wasn't originally. It was more about having... as something that was in a local area network, but it may work over the internet reasonably well. I don't know. So we can test that, and I'm going to put that down as, a distinct maybe. So to explain what that is, you can run the editor in multiplayer, and then as I'm dragging stuff around the world, Alex would see me dragging stuff around the world. The cool thing there is it actually works with our VR editor as well. So I could be standing there in VR while Alex is dragging stuff or Tony's dragging stuff, and we would be able to just see those changes. Some people on regular computers, some people on VR. You can do it in sequencer, so you can see the animations going on around you as people are scrubbing through. I'll see what we can do, but how long have I got until the next session? It's 2 hours?
2 hours?
Yep.
Okay, we'll see if we can get it running, but no promises. What other questions have come through? How do you get the leaves and the stone texture on the floor to not look so flat? So you can, that's a great question. You can use displacement maps, which just kind of puffs it out a bit. So you can actually have a texture that says the height values, and will paint the rocks upwards wherever you need them. So usually using tessellation offsets for that works pretty well. It's actually really cheap on landscapes because they get processed in the regular tessellation pass. Any questions about the program in general? Any questions about anything to do with any terms, conditions, or anything like that there? Because we do have Tony on the line, and he's the authority around these parts, so he can generally give you a bit more information with regards to however the contest is structured, or any info folks may want to have from there. So that 10-second lag every time I have to get used to. Every time I say it, it's just like silence. More of a general one. How many minutes is realistic to aim for in 6 weeks if one person is doing all of the visual work? Of course, not all from scratch, but whatever's necessary to tell your story, right? Is probably how I would answer that. What do you reckon, Tony? Is there any...
Yeah, same. It's whatever you need to tell your story. I think very specifically, and this is not a question I can answer, is how much work can you expect to generate in that 6-week period? That's a tough one, and that's going to be determined entirely by your capability in UE.
Yeah.
We should probably add that we are going to be around to help people as they go into production.
Yeah.
We're not abandoning you after this week and going, right, you're on your own, be free. We will be around in that production phase to help out. So we're expecting there's a lot of questions going to be thrown at us, and we're going to try and make a regular sort of meeting time, once or twice a week to do a general catch up with everybody and see how you're all doing.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Like when this actually starts off in earnest, we're not just gonna leave you and be like, all right, have fun. We gave you training months ago. Our desire is for every team here to produce the best thing that you could in that 6 weeks. So if you have questions, we're free to answer them. And for what it's worth, it's actually going to be easier answering questions. It's going to be easier answering questions when the competition starts because there's fewer people involved across the board. So it's a bit easier to spend a bit more one-on-one time with various projects. If there are any viability concerns, though, that you have now, please feel free to start up that discussion. We're more than happy to be like, this is doable or this may be a problem. And again, like we're not after anything that's necessarily super realistic. So you could approach it from a stylized background or something like that. So how you want to approach that is up to you, and what you think is going to be necessary to get those resources over the line in time is up to you. You remember Tony mentioned that UE would be selecting 16 films. Was that in terms of the total amount of films selected by the state, or after those films are made? I'm actually having a little bit of trouble with that question.
So how it's, if I'm reading this correctly, we've basically guaranteed that there will be one film per state, definitely. So every state is going to have a short film in the challenge. The rest of them are based on the applications we receive. What states they go to, it will be determined, really by the applicant and the quality of the application. That's really it.
And again, like there are some things that are popping up here with regards to concerns for certain things. Like in this case, being in Tasmania and finding animators. Like they are around. You just may need to look for animators in different spaces. So a film animator or a game animator. I know like a couple down there. Looking at some of the games communities that are running down there, I've suddenly gone blank on the name of the games community in Tasmania. But there's quite a few like student animators and such that may be potentially involved in a short film. So approaching that may be useful for kind of filling up some of those roles. But there are a lot of talented individuals out that way. So you just may not have to look for them in the circles that you may be accustomed to previously. That's all.
And if you are struggling, like Nick, talk to Jane and Alex and see if they can be flexible on stuff. The Screen Taz team are really lovely.
There you go. Alex has patted the dog as per request. So the aim is for the final pixels to be coming out of UE to answer the question with regards to can we use After Effects for things like that afterwards. The aim is to do your grading inside of Unreal. So the final pixels. Any other questions that we've got there?
There's a page that shows you for judging criteria. No, there isn't. It was more just, the thing for us is it's your creativity. What can you do with the technology? The tech is there to support that creativity. That's it. We're not looking for anything very specific to do with Unreal at all. This was about you.
Yeah. So that's definitely the case. Like Tony, when originally kind of setting this whole thing up, you left the criteria pretty broad for this exact reasoning, right? So if you would have criteria that were too strict, you would rule out a lot of films that could be made. Someone's asked about like hair and fur. It's worth noting that in the engine we now have grooms, so you can actually do real-time hair simulations that actually runs through our particle sims, and you can actually just set up grooms to have like these really gorgeous, luscious locks going on, which is great for me because it means that, well, go for everyone. But what I'm really loving about this is that every game used to be like Space Marines because they didn't want to have hair. And every woman that was in a game, they would often have like very tight ponytails and things like that. So some capacity to kind of move them around as a full object. So what's really lovely is having these having groom support in engine now means we're going to see a lot of characters and like much more diversity than we previously did on that front. So I think that's really exciting, personally. Unfortunately, though, having said that, grooms are pretty much at the top of the list of things I should have looked at inside of Unreal, but I haven't really had the time since they came in. So I unfortunately won't be running a session on any of the groom setups. However, I believe the documentation is pretty solid on that front. So Alex may be able to drop in a link.
Already have.
Oh. Well played. Well, yeah, right there. Okay then. So hopefully that helps out on some projects. If you're rendering anything of the sort. So can you add groom to hair existing on your model, or is this an Unreal build? I believe you set it up and it imports it as a strand-based importer. But again, like I haven't fooled around with it myself, so I can't have too much certainty on that one. Cool. Any other questions on that one? It sounds like we're doing pretty well, I guess. Hopefully this outdoor session was... I say outdoor session, it makes it sound like we were all like outside of lockdown, just chilling in the sun while we did some Unreal. Hopefully this exterior environment session was useful. Again, feel free to follow up with questions. There is the main email address that we use that you can reach out to, which is sfc-anz@epicgames.com. Beyond that, we're seeing some really lovely community discussions across both the Unreal Engine Australia Facebook group, as well as the community-run Unreal Engine Oceanic Discord. So
can we quickly answer Graham Hannah's question, because I'm pretty sure you've asked it.
That's
the second time you've asked.
Sorry. When I add something from the marketplace to my library, I can add it to a project. Is there a better workflow for getting just elements from them into my scene, like I did with the kite scene? So there are two ways to go about this. One of them is you import them into an empty project. You readjust everything that you want, you clean it up, you choose what you have, and then you use the migrate button, and it will only copy over just the specific things. I know it's an intermediate step, a little bit of a pain, but it also means that you can be pretty clear on that. There is a really, 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 really cool plugin that honestly kind of kills me that we don't have as a default feature, but it's this UAsset view. I'm just going to open this up. It's a marketplace plugin. Here we go. UAsset Browser by Mary Nate. Yeah. So this is a... yeah, cool. I'm screen sharing. Sorry. So...
Did we just
yeah.
lose?
Wait.
I think we did.
Where'd you lose?
I'll drop it.
Where did you lose?
Yeah.
Oh, he's back.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. Everyone's saying you lost me, but I'm still here. So this is actually a really, really cool plugin. This is, you'll have noticed that for all of the sessions that we've run, I very, very rarely recommend plugins. Just Unreal is trying to be as fully featured as it can, and most of the time there are solutions that are in engine. But this plugin allows you to open up any marketplace asset and actually drop it into your scene without importing it, seeing what it looks like, and if you like it. So in this case, that rock is being dragged in from the marketplace. And if they like it, then importing it into your scene that way, which is just like miraculous as far as I'm concerned. I like, I can procedurally generate an entire forest and be like, oh, that was cool. And then someone shows me the ability to like drag and drop assets, and I'm like, whoa! So you can kind of see where my priorities are. Cool. But yeah, as I said before, the Discord's been getting a lot of attention. We've had some really great discussions going on there. One of the really nice things that's been taking place there is there is a looking for teams channel. So if you are looking for people and you have a bit of a discussion in that place, or if you have skills that you want to offer and, just be like, hey, I'm an animator, anyone need help? Having that discussion there is really great. So we've seen some really great discussions taking place. I would consider the Discord link that Alex has dropped into the channel as a consideration. But otherwise, it sounds like we're pretty good. So I guess we'll wind it up. So hopefully this has been useful for everybody involved. I covered quite a bit of content, I know, but the aim for me was to go through some of the broad strokes. My apologies for the crashes. I seem to be getting more of them since running OBS, which is awkward because it means that I get crashes from showing people stuff, which is the worst time to get crashes. But I hope the session was generally useful. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our role is to support devs. And the three of us have a pretty broad knowledge across everything from the program and business needs through to Alex's engineering skill set, and then me just poking buttons in the editor. So we have a pretty good setup. So please let us know. Every now and then we get inundated with emails, so it may take us a day or two to get back to you. My apologies if so. But yeah, as I said, hopefully the session's been useful, and I hope some of you join us for tonight's session on intro to Sequencer. So, and then we have advanced tomorrow morning. So hopefully this was useful for everyone, and hope to see you later. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, folks.
See you all.
Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm